meandered. I loved art as a child, which I think most kids do. Spent a lot of time doing it as a teenager, and then kind of stopped for about 10 years. And then a couple of years ago I was hospitalised, and while I was in the hospital I started like drawing and painting again, and it all just kind of snowballed because it just became something more important to me and understanding myself and what was happening. I had originally wanted to do art in college, and then I changed my mind, so I got a history degree. Yeah, so I did history and sociology instead. Do you know, at the end of the day, I think that was really beneficial as well, but it's definitely been a bit circuitous to get here, you know. So I think I spent a lot of time learning realism, because there is so much value in studying it and learning how to draw from life, and you know, the kind of ubiquitous amongst artists copy of Grey's Anatomy, so that you can learn how things all slot together, and then just trying to distort that. Like, for me, I love when things are a little bit off. Like, I'm a big horror fan, like Southeast Asian horror. So when things are just that little bit off, when there is something that unsettles you and you can't quite understand why, and then once you realize what it is, you realize it's something so quotidian, but it's just turned to 11, and that's what's hitting you, but you've to like disentangle it. That is the kind of media that I enjoy. I think that's just kind of translated to the kind of things that I paint, of like, well, what about this that's a little bit off? And also there is the secondary element of, well, reality is so heavily based in our own perception. There's that kind of like existentialist concept that reality is only made by overlapping realities, and where they overlap and meet, that consensus is what we consider reality writ large. And so it's kind of playing with that a bit as well, because reality in itself is such an interesting concept, because, you know, reality, perception, they all create their own little worlds. There are so many cases where we will see things and be like, well, okay, this is reality to this person, and because it is reality to them, that informs their relationship with the world, which then in turn makes that reality actually real. You know, like what is perceived as real is real in its consequence. So for me, the idea of reality is something very malleable. So in terms of inspiration, a lot of it comes from having a visual impairment. So having double vision and the world always being a little bit blurry does influence me, and I like playing with sharpness and also with, you know, kind of like overlapping images, because that ties into the idea of overlapping realities for me, of, you know, when you see two things at once, you're kind of seeing two iterations of the same image, but they're very like subtle differences just because of how they're positioned, because it's not like a static, oh, the double vision is here and here. It depends on the position of my head, or, you know, things like this, because it's the eye moving. That's definitely foundational to the whole thing. You know, studies of anatomy are really important to it, which they are for anyone, but I love using images that have like spines or anything like that, because just because of my own medical experiences with paralysis and things like that, I'm absolutely fascinated by the human brain. I think it's the final frontier. We know so much more about space. We even know more about like the deep sea than we do about the brain, and we know next to nothing about the deep sea, which I'm okay with. That can stay there. I don't need 40-foot squid in my dreams. Actually, I kind of do. And I think just a lot of my own like personal life experiences and, you know, like traumatic experiences, and parsing them by putting them on a canvas and looking at them in a way of, this is what happened at X time. This is who I am now. This is how that happened. This is the story to me of getting from point A to B, or, you know, sometimes getting from A to C by going to K, and, you know, like bouncing around the place. To me, they very much are the story of dealing with parts of my life that I feel were in themselves ugly, but are then, you know, almost like using alchemy. It's like transmuting it into something more positive and beautiful and enduring. And maybe there will be elements of ugliness in it, but that's reality. Reality isn't always beautiful and kind and lovely and joyful. There's horror and pain and grief and all kinds of things packed into it. And I like to kind of try and blend them together, because to me that feels more real than simply being this is one emotion by itself. So that doesn't happen. People don't have that. You know, ask anybody who's experienced grief and they'll tell you how conflicting it is and how confusing it is, you know? Yeah, it's that kind of thing that I like to focus on and work on, as much for myself as anything else, because I think it has incredible value in helping you deal with parts of your life that maybe you don't know how to verbalize. You can put something on a canvas and be like, oh, I really needed to get this out of my body. It was weighing me down, you know? So like that's kind of the core part of the work, is this is my life. And I played around with a lot using different pigments of pink in the background and trying to get them as close to each other as possible, but using different light fastness. So there are messages like written into the back of it about this like iteration of Medusa and how our concept of her has changed, and how there is like the personal Medusa and things like that, and you know what is and isn't monstrous. So there is stuff written in the back in the same pink, but because they're written with different pigments and light fastness, over time the very, very bright kind of like these ones here will fade first, and so the messages will start to come through.
Wow.
And it's you know, partially because aging and decay is natural, and it doesn't mean that something is losing beauty or value. It's just telling more of its own story and being more raw. So to me, it's kind of like trying to use time as a bit of a material as well. So composition, I will have in mind from the off. I will do my rough sketch and my underpainting, kind of have an idea of where my light sources and things are. Then it gets to the palette, which is the really fun part. Like, don't get me wrong, I love drawing, but the underpainting and the drawing, that's the part where I'm kind of like, oh, let's get this done so we can get to throwing paint on this. The palette is really fun because I kind of just pick colours that I love and try to make them work together, and that can change so much over the course of a single painting. I think there are some of my paintings that if you went back and went through the layers of all the different colours they went through, you could make a flip book, the entire colour palette, to be honest. Yeah, like sometimes I'll have a clear thing going in of this is based on X or Y thing, or I want to have the feeling of, you know, a sky at this time of day, or I want to evoke this mood, and work on colours based around that. So, you know, if I'm doing something that is kind of nighttime kind of feeling, or maybe a little bit more shadowy, there'll be a lot of like purples and blues, and I'll work through those. But then sometimes I genuinely just look at my paints and I'm like, I absolutely love bright pink, and I didn't allow myself to like it for such a long time as, you know, anti-establishment teenage girl. Now I'm still listening to death metal, but I'm throwing as much fluorescent pink on everything as possible. Like, Barbie can like black metal too. It's okay. You can do two things. Part of it is actually just, I love bright colours, and it took me so long to allow myself to. So now I'm just finding joy in that as well, and buying all the brightest colours I can find. Like, sometimes is methodical. You know, I'll, you know, read about the Zorn palette or different like traditional palettes that can be used and work within them. And then some days I just come in and I think, I haven't used bright yellow in a while. I think it's good to play with colours that I haven't used very much. So like sometimes I will look at the paints that I have and I'll be like, I have so many reds. I am completely lacking in this other colour tone. and just try to do something based in those colours, because sometimes you don't realise how much you love a colour until you play around with it. And I think that's part of what I try to do as well, is to blend an academic approach with the joyful, childlike approach of, I like this colour, slap it on. Like, even if it's sometimes literally with my hands. Like, I do make a point of trying to do that to every painting. In the base layer, of put stuff on with like finger painting, just to remind myself of like that tactile, fun, joyful feeling. I don't do it in, you know, ones where, you know, like this Medusa, where there's a lot of like more negative emotion maybe attached to it. But I mean, this cat got so much finger painting on it because it was like, I'm doing something fun and I'm doing something joyful and childlike, because sometimes we as adults need to allow ourselves to do that. Like, look at beauty and joy and just pick colours and shapes that are fun. You know, I do a lot of very angular faces, like very severe looking people. So for this, I just wanted a cat that had like the roundest head and body imaginable, just that you kind of wanted to squish. For me, I think it is all centered on the base emotional intention that I have going in. That is what's going to dictate like how angular or how round something is, what kind of tonalities I'm going to be using. You know, all of those decisions come after the decision of the emotion that goes into something. So for her, it was kind of a decision of the idea of when human becomes monster. You know, like throughout history, we have made so many myths and folkloric tales about monsters, you know, to cover up things that humans did, because it was so horrible that we had to invent werewolves to explain why some dude went on a rampage in Norway, or, you know, talk about vampires to be like, okay, actually there's a plague going around, you all need to be really careful. If you see anybody you can't cross water, they might be rabid, so we're going to make this tale. You know, like, it's such a thing that we do, and we disconnect monster and human when they're the same thing. Because when we paint evil people in history as being monsters, it's like, no, a lot of them were normal people, and you need to remember that, because if you don't keep that in check, you can silently be complicit with something horrendous yourself. It happens all the time. Having the different lighting on her is that feeling of, at different time periods, seeing her as either human or monster, threat or friend. And then over time, as the text in the background will come through, which is a large part of the fluorescence as well, because fluorescent paints have like a lower light fastness, that will go before the messages behind it, which are in like a very solid pigment, so they will remain. So I think it was very much about playing with the idea of monstrosity. What makes a monster? Why do we perceive things as monstrous? And what, at its very core, is a monster? You know? I don't think Medusa was ever a monster. No. One of the greater challenges with, you know, the social media side of things, or the advertising side of things, is that it takes so much time and specialised knowledge. That time does detract a lot from painting. And then, honestly, I just hate it. But it does take very specialised knowledge. Like, I have tried reading all of the SEO guidelines and, you know, your timing guidelines and your scheduling, but it's a very different part of the brain, and it feels more demanding to me, you know, in the same way that if I like said to somebody who, you know, loves their job as an accountant, if I said to them like, hey, do you want to paint something surreal, they might be like, what are you talking about? Absolutely not. It's just different parts of the brain. I do find it quite stressful, to the point that I very rarely do it. In terms of the creative side, I do think there are a lot of opportunities out there, but it is very, very difficult. the competition is so strong and we have such like limited resources. Obviously we're grateful for whatever we do have. I am hoping that the universal basic income for the artists is actually, you know, extended. We will hope for that, keep messaging and doing all the things we can for it. Art is so valuable to society and people don't even realise that they engage with it every single day. And we're so used to a world that's with it that we take it for granted, I think. So I do have a show coming up in the Marina with Reality Inspiration. There's going to be 20 of us, which is really fun, having just a big room of diverse artists. I love that kind of stuff. And then next month there will be a show in Outlaw Studios of all the different outlaws doing their own pieces, which again, there's a lot of variety. We have puppeteers, we have people who do sculpture, people who paint with rust, people, you know, there's like just a huge mix within a very small collective. So that's going to be fun as well, and we're going to do a little Gaza fundraiser as well, where people are going to set different percentages of what they sell based on what each artist individually can afford. But there will be percentages then that go to Mask Gaza, I believe is who we're partnering with. And then I've another fundraiser next month down in Cork City, where just made a few little pieces and we're going to have a night for Palestine. Just try to sort money for that. Yeah, so there are a few little things like that that I'm doing that I'm looking forward to, and you know, maybe doing prints of this little guy for one of the cat charities in town, because I know they have huge bills every month, and you know, it's kind of like trying to find ways to make art actionable. And you know, I can't afford to give much monetarily, but maybe, you know, I can do this and generate something good and positive, and you know, they'll get money that way. I don't know where I am going, but I will not stop here.